Welcome to the Falling Walls plenary table, the future of clean energy technologies, accelerating the transition to carbon neutrality.
Hello everyone, welcome back from the lunch break. My name is Jennifer Porto and I am so excited to join you here at Radialsystem in Berlin for the second half of our panel discussions today. You just heard it, the future of clean energy technologies accelerating the transition to carbon neutrality. In this session, we aim to discuss how we can further accelerate the process of the energy transition to become a climate-neutral circular economy by developing next-generation energy technologies. I'd like to introduce our 5 panelists now. Joining me here on the stage are Thijs Vega from DTU Orbit, Bernd Rech from the Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin, Ting Xu from the University of California, Berkeley College of Chemistry, Johannes Henriksson from Compular, and Norbert Holtkamp at SLAC, the National Accelerator Laboratory at Stanford. Panelists, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please. Before we get started today, I have to thank each of you for taking the time that you took earlier this week or this afternoon to chat. It's such a pleasure to be able to come into contact with each of you and to talk and to discuss. And I'd like to invite us all at the table today to really dig deep, to really engage with the conversation that we're going to have. I've got a bunch of stuff to say. No one's interested in what I have to say. They want to hear what you're here to say. So I've got some questions, but if you hear something that happens across the table and you think that you want to chime in, I want you to do that. If you have a question that you want to pose to another panelist, if you have an observation that you want to make, whatever, I really hope that you'll take the opportunity to do so. We'll also have a chance to open up the session to audience questions later on, but let's get started. As we're seeing right now, there are very real social and geopolitical impacts when it comes to energy production and delivery, and the transition to clean energy is threatened by risks to energy security, sustainability, and access to affordable energy. This transition to carbon neutrality requires a new way of thinking on a global scale. As our session brief states, developing new materials is a core element in the innovation cycle to accelerate the process of energy transition. A question that I want to address, maybe not the very first thing, is how do we make sure that we don't recreate the framework that we already have in place? In short, how do we make sure we don't replicate extractive colonialism? And we're going to get there, but where I actually want to start is with you, Bernd Rech. In the research for this panel discussion, I came across a Deutsche Welle interview that you did about 11 years ago. You mentioned that we need bigger, better power networks to get sun and wind from where it's needed. I'm sorry, from where it's produced to where it's needed. 11 years ago, we weren't there. We're still not there. But as you predicted then, solar and wind energy are cheaper now than fossil fuels. You said in that interview that the sun gives off enough energy in 1 hour to provide a year's worth of power to the Earth, which is amazing. But we don't have the infrastructure to really unleash that potential. How can we get there in the next 11 years?
Yeah, thanks a lot and great to be here. I think it's true that solar and wind are now among the sources, energy sources, which are the cheapest in the world. And the question still is quite important how to transport. I think in Germany there are some plans and some of the lines are close to be under construction and we need them. I think especially the crisis at the moment has taught us that it would have been good to have them in place already. And it would have been good if we would have invested even more in solar and wind energy. So we had a running industry in Germany 10 years ago. And partly it needs to be rebuilt for Germany, but on the other hand, on a global scale, I think the renewable energy has made tremendous progress, and I think it will become the backbone of a future global energy system. But this system will look different in different countries, and different regions, but it will rely also on international cooperation. It's not so easy when we follow the discussion at the moment with the crisis we have, with this terrible war which is happening. But I think we need to be aware that we are all living on one globe and that we need to solve the energy topic. It's from key importance for our climate crisis that we are ahead of. I think the climate crisis is to 75%, it's an energy issue. And yeah, I hope we can make some good predictions today on this table, which become true in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much. We're going to look at those predictions in a minute. You also mentioned international cooperation. I want to talk about in a second. But first, I want to talk about some of the question that I first asked. And I'll ask this question to you, Thijs. You deal with using AI to look for potential clean energy solutions using new materials. So when you look at what in Germany we call the current crisis, which has a lot to do with the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine, how much is the search for new materials that you take part in about science, and how much of it is now influenced by geopolitics?
Well, I could say from the outset, it's mainly about the science, but the geopolitics has really played in over the last years. I mean, a lot of the work that we do is really trying to shorten the path from fundamental discovery and understanding to viable products. It typically takes about 20 years from any green deep tech technology from that fundamental discovery to a viable product. You could say over the last couple of years, we've looked at ways to convert and store renewable energy. We wouldn't have considered making methane, for instance. It's not something you could viably make. We would make high value chemicals and try to do that. But with geopolitics playing in, you need to be able to have a variety of available storage media, fuels and chemicals. So I think it has transitioned, but it's still the science at the core.
So science at the core. I want to turn here to science and talk a little bit about the work that you do. I know that you're going to, I think, give a talk tomorrow morning. You and your team won a prize, the 2021 Create the Future Design Contest. Congratulations, that's an incredible accomplishment. I don't want to talk about that so much right now because I want to talk a little bit about batteries, and then I'll come to you as well, Johannes. How do we take some of the work that he's doing here and use some of the work that you're doing here and then align it with what you're doing at Compular? Tingshu, maybe you'd like to start.
So let's talk about where we are and what I think the future should go in terms of material synthesis. By the end of the day, any technology you develop, you need to have materials to realize it. So this is a part of, and then material synthesis has to be, going from design synthesis, characterization to utilization, integration, etc. I think where we are, the basic science are quite strong. What happened in the last 30, 40 years really built a really solid foundation for us to go forward. In particular, if you look at where nanoscience has, developed, I think it really opened up a lot of new opportunities. And the challenge right now is how you integrate material synthesis, data science, and try to materialize the basic knowledge, the discovery we have. But one thing I do think is important during that process is really trying to put the circularity, the life cycle analysis, the environmental impact, the ecology, and as well as particular consumer behavior, policymakers, etc., into that particular design. And I do like the question you asked to Thijs just now. I think is wonderful because in the scientific community, a lot of times what we do, we have a problem, we want to solve it. It's very much a linear thinking. Sustainability was not a particular design criteria, but I think going forward, it has to. And, how you're going to really get into this time scale matching, what do we take from nature versus how soon we can return it back. So that almost like you are driving in the highway, you get into an exit, and when you enter into this fast-running cars, you want to be in the same speed as what nature has already evolved over billions of years. So that's what I think the future should hold. So I'm going to pass it to you then.
I'll come back to you.
I agree. And from my perspective, we are a startup and we develop simulation software for energy storage. And I really think that you're spot on with collaboration and interdisciplinary thinking. So that's also with organizations, the type of organizations. In many cases, it could be that we are working with a battery developer, a university, and a startup as ourselves. And we come from the computational side, and we have the experimentalists and their expertise in that group as well. And I think that is key to get the breakthroughs that we need.
We haven't heard from everyone yet at the table. I'll come back to you in a moment, but I saw you nodding, please.
Yes, because I think it's a key. We really need to reinvent the way we invent clean energy materials. And if we want to shorten this time span of 20 years, let's say down to 2 or 5 years, we need to be able to exchange data from all parts of the traditionally siloed development process that we talked about before. And that definitely includes both bridging simulations and experiments. So I think that's a key to accelerating the discovery of clean energy materials. New infrastructure that cuts across individual labs, individual countries.
New infrastructure that cuts across. Collaboration was something you said as well. I'd like to bring you into the conversation because when I found that you were going to be on the panel, I was really excited because you work at Slack. Every time I visit my in-laws, we drive past Slack on 280. I'm so happy to have California represented here. And your LinkedIn bio says that you have experience with mega science projects. And I think, is there a science project in the world right now that is bigger than the energy transition?
Yeah, sure. There's several of them, actually. Question whether you call them a science project, but they're certainly development projects. The most famous one is probably ITER. It's a collaboration of...
What is ITER?
ITER is a fusion tokamak. It's a fusion device. It tries to recreate a reaction similar to what the sun uses to create its heat. It's created on Earth. And it's built as a collaboration of 7 countries, whereby Europe is considered one country, and 6 others. South Korea, China, India, Russia, Japan, United States. I hope I got them all. It's an experiment, but it's also an industrial scale, implementation in which all the countries try to learn how to do that. There's several other ones that I would consider that way. France has, and the United States and others, China have done a lot of development on small reactors, nuclear reactors, fission, sorry. Something that's a little bit controversial in Germany, quite a bit controversial. To talk about that, right or wrong.
I think there will be a discussion on that later today, so I don't.
Yeah,
let's focus here elsewhere.
Yeah.
But when we're looking at the energy transition, and I think that all of this plays into the energy transition, you manage mega science projects. Can we do this?
Sure, we can do that. If there's a will to do so, and to execute, I think there's many examples of where it was done well, and many examples where it wasn't. The problem is that there's sometimes not the willingness to learn from the ones that didn't work, for all kinds of reasons, political, geopolitical, whatever. But I want to make one more step on this, right? So right now we have really talked about science development, new materials. Science is the first step, right? And there's this, people call the valley of death, right? There's this transition from science to real application and to scaling up. And there's many steps. Materials are key, not only for energy. They're key for all kinds of stuff. And one of the things that I see is that takes time. And we don't have time. So you asked the question at the beginning, how do we make this fast? Well, if we want to do it fast, we have to do it with many of the technology we have today, and that needs all kinds of stuff. Rare earth metals, that need to be replaced, but they're called rare earth for a reason, right? Because Germany doesn't have access to them, really, other than on the market. Other countries secure their resources on that end, and that's a impediment to do what you just said, accelerate and go fast. And it needs a strategic vision on how to implement that.
Thijs, please.
That is definitely key. I mean, if you look at the critical raw materials issue and the scalability of the technologies and materials we're developing, one of the concepts that we are working with in, for instance, the Big Map project that we are running in the European Union is trying to do inverse design, but doing it in such a way that you can have manufacturability, synthesizability, and also recyclability of the materials taken directly into the design process. Because it is a key. I mean, we are dependent on scarce materials for a lot of the conversion and storage processes today. So we need to take it into account already in the design process.
Please.
Yeah, just would like to add, I think this is the challenge, to come to a completely circular economy, and this in many ways. So let's say looking on the climate, so we need to close the carbon cycle. We need to use carbon still, but we need to be careful where we get the carbon source. It should be as soon as possible use the carbon dioxide what we have in the air, and go to a hydrogen-driven economy. There are so many materials questions involved in between, for storage, for catalysts, for windmills, for solar panels, and so on. And I think that's a key, that we have to speed up this and stop the thinking in all those classical technology readiness levels, to say that's fundamental, this is applied, more applied, then there's the famous valley of death in between. And I think this is something what we are trying to be focused on in material science, but together, much more together with industry and with society, because all those questions are more and more interrelated.
Maybe I can add on that, and I think there's a very important is a human factor, right? We discuss a lot of science, and you really have to think about, by the end of the day, it's people who made it happen. And when we start to think about people in this whole business, you really have to think about it as a multidimensional. So there's training, there's the age group, you need to really build out the pipelines. There are also a knowledge base that's, a lot of, we are who we were, right? So we represent the integration of the life experience, and people from different regions around the world should really interchange their ideas, because their past life experience is something that data is just not able to, a lot of it happened during the random encounter. So that is something, education, building pipelines, start to exchange people. And I think this really goes back to the theme, how you're going to break the wall between discipline, between geographic, between economical status, between race, etc.
Johannes, I'd like to bring you in at this point, because you work for a startup.
Yes.
And I wonder, we have science, we have industry, we have policy, but they're startups, you're part of industry, but you're also, when we were speaking earlier, we talked about creative chaos. What can creative chaos bring to the table when it comes to the pipeline, when it comes to education?
I mean, first of all, you learn so much from working in a startup. So and we can be very fast, very agile and flexible, and our customers, actually I have to give them a lot of compliments, because they're taking a lot of risks by working with startups. And in the battery industry that we're focusing on, customers really are eager to do that. They need to, they understand that they need to try new technologies in order to catch up. Because here in Europe, we haven't really made any batteries for a very long time. And now all of these companies are starting to build gigafactories and trying to catch up with Asia. But to do that, you need to do things differently. And just thinking about the time aspects that we touched upon earlier, and training and education, where are our customers going to find all the talents and all the engineers needed to build their batteries or to develop their batteries? And there I think we are a tool to help them become more smart and more resource efficient. And it's incredibly exciting to be part of that journey and to see how much the whole industry is just growing right now.
When we look at digital technologies in light of this, I know some of the work that you do deals with AI.
Yes, I mean, we talk about the importance of people, and I fully agree. I have to start off with that.
Let me frame that question, because it takes a certain amount of time to train a person to do a thing, or to retrain a person to do a thing differently. That just takes the time that it takes. But what can digital technologies, what can AI do to speed this up?
Well, you heard in one of the previous panels here today that it actually also takes time to train the digital technologies, and takes a lot of data, and I think that's another part of it. But once you have the data, once you have trained the models, then they're able to make faster exploitation of the data they have, but also exploration. And that's one of the things we're looking at, a multi-parameter phase space. It's beyond comprehension, essentially. And making those predictions, sometimes the AI-driven algorithms can be better at exploring that, and also using the bad data. We generate a lot of bad data, and using that in a smart way is one of the ways forward. But we need to be able to share the data and use it across traditional domains, across industry and academia. So transdisciplinary competences are key.
I think in many of the things, collaboration, it's going to come back to collaboration.
Yes, so again, right, so since I come from a big science project and, you build stuff, you just not develop the one thing or the other thing or this thing, right? You start integrating all these things together. And I think this integrated vision of taking the computational part and the material and the AI to learn, the cycle, the accelerated cycle to develop, so you can test many, many things quickly, right? And then how to produce them. That's something that, we are not, scientists are typically not trained to do that. They're trained to do something specific and to solve a specific problem. And many of us are very good at doing that. Others are very good at taking these pieces and bringing them together so you have the product at the end, or a vision of the product. And I think there's an enormous potential, and there's enormously interesting stuff that we talk here at Falling Walls and other pieces, right? It's just this, the computational materials, the AI. 3D printing is something we haven't talked about, which is a huge market at the moment. It's very developing. And, when people here often think about 3D printing, they think about, oh, there's a Matchbox car coming out, right? No, it's not a Matchbox car. It's anything between a car and a fully established, computer chip or a battery.
I want to talk about specifics because I think it's great to talk in big terms, and I want to open this up to everybody when it comes to digital technologies. What's the thing happening right now that you can look to as a great example? I won't ask you to tell me what a terrible example is because people are watching. But what is something that is, Bernd Reich, what is something that is a fantastic example of digital technology that's happening right now?
I think one example is if you look on energy grids, and they're getting now more and more, we have fluctuating energies, the intermittence of solar and wind and so on. But I think 10 years ago, it was not clear how this can be controlled. But due to a lot of digital tools, I think there is a big progress. There's a lot of know-how already in companies how to steer a complex system to be very fast. So you need to react much faster than a simple operator could do. So these are examples where digital technologies already have a big impact on the first steps towards the transition of the energy systems. But to give an example for material science, where I think you should tell us what is the best prediction you already had by artificial intelligence for a new material.
I don't know who wants to go first. I think there were actually a lot of beautiful examples in this morning's roundtable panel at 9 o'clock upstairs for the chemical synthesis. Yeah. And I think we deal mainly in organic materials, and there are fewer, you can say, glorious examples than there are in the organic chemistry realm, but beautiful examples of how you can speed up the chemical synthesis of new compounds. I think that there are a number of really good examples there.
What does that mean?
Well, you can imagine that you have the ability to automate the procedure for synthesizing a given product. There were some beautiful examples by Professor Lee Cronin that showed his computer that allows you to do synthesis in an automated fashion, that allows you then to follow specific recipes, and these recipes can then be, you can say, predicted using different types of AI for identifying new products that haven't. I think the term that was used upstairs was get away from the boring products and into the exciting ones. And I think that's one of the ways.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So are you willing to make a prediction on when you will replace cobalt in a battery?
Well, if you look at that's one of the key things. We have this project called Big Map that is actually looking at that, reducing the amount of cobalt. But if you look at just the industrial development, the amount of cobalt that's being used is actually decreasing. And if you look at the total cost of materials in a lithium-ion battery, it's about 2/3 of the cost. But right now, the lithium part is actually taking over, so the cobalt is sort of a reduced problem. So I think we will get there. Industry is doing a great job, but there are other technologies out there. It could also be using sodium instead of lithium. They're coming up commercially now, so we'll get there, I'm sure.
I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I recognize the comments, and I think For us, that's one of the areas where we can contribute by screening new battery technologies, new battery materials, and then predicting the properties and the performance, and trying to reach the same type of performance but without the cobalt.
Tingshu, I want to make sure we come back to you to talk about materials.
Okay, all right. So let's follow on that, what's the use of digital? I'll give you 2 examples.
Great.
One is, as the end consumer, it just happened yesterday. California is really cold. The radiant heating system in my house is down. We cannot find a plumber. So, talk about education, training. I have this test. So we have solar panel, we have Powerwall. So I have this app. Literally, my husband and I was on the phone. We trying to arrange a heater around the house so that we're not drawing power from the grid. And having that app in my hand, I know exactly how many kilowatts I'm drawing, how many kilowatts my solar panel is generating. So throughout the day, while the sun is out, we have 0 from the solar panel, and the house is still being heated. That to me was absolutely wonderful. Just having that knowledge, knowing how many heaters we should turn on, how many we should turn off, and alternating without overload the switch. So on the other end is really, the second example is what I do in my research. A lot of times we do biomimetic materials. The idea is that nature has been evolved over so many years, has been very efficient, and it's a really good example for us to model material after. And in the past, we can have a specific design rules. For example, we see the muscles, we see the bones. But really what is interesting now is how you're going to mimic nature at the system level. And that is simply beyond a human intelligence. Individual person can go about just using intuition. And we actually benefit a tremendous amount from learn by using the tools developed in the data science community, trying to extract out the genetic information, which is known, and then using that as a blueprint. And I'm super excited about that potential. And I think getting into the system that you cannot pinpoint, like we have been doing, since we know A plus B equals to C, but what happens is when you go from A plus Z, there's so many different combinations, there's so many uncertainties, so many randomness, and that's what I think data science is going to come into play, and it's going to allow us to design materials at the system level. And that is something I personally consider is a significant breakthrough, and it's a quantum leap from where we have been making materials.
I see you both nodding. Bendrich, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I just want to add a bit, if you say, I think it's extremely exciting to mimic nature, but I think for this question we have here to carbon neutrality, we certainly have to mimic nature, but we have to beat nature in terms of efficiency, because if we look on the natural system, it's clear going via CO2 from the atmosphere, using sunlight, then the plants generate sugar and oxygen, what we all need, and we have to mimic it now with much, much higher efficiency and with new technologies, and certainly with those urgently needed new materials, which are the basis of all those new technologies, from solar cells, batteries, catalysts. I think catalytic processes we have not discussed much about, but maybe 80% of this chemical industry products we need are based on catalysis, from green hydrogen, synthetic fuels, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, maybe starting on that point, I think a lot of the methods that we develop should be thought of in a modular way. I mean, we're dealing a lot with batteries, electrochemical systems, but electrocatalysis is key to power to X. So a lot of the technologies that we develop, a lot of the models can actually be applied in both electrocatalysis and in batteries. And that's where the uncertainty actually comes in. Because learning from nature, we have laws of physics, combining those with data-driven approaches, so hybrid models that have both physics and data-driven aspects, but add uncertainty on top. So the models should know when they don't know. And then the key is identifying what data can I use to train? What data is most valuable? Is that for my program to launch an experiment in your lab? Is that for my computer to launch a simulation at a high-performance computer somewhere else? That is key. So uncertainty-aware hybrid models that have physical understanding and utilize the big data.
I fully agree. And I have to tell you, in the material synthesis, a lot of times you cannot avoid impurities. It's impossible to get any material 100% pure. And wood impurity doesn't matter. Wood impurity is the key. That's where alloys, right? If you start looking into the history, I think those are the things you cannot replicate in the test tube with what do you have in the lab, because there is that level of change when you start to think about scale up.
So,
Please.
yeah, so maybe one more thing to just step back. I just realized, right, we talk a lot about materials and batteries here, and maybe all of the people in the auditorium know why, but maybe not. I mean, batteries are key, energy storage devices are key to the success of alternative energies.
Why?
So, why? Because, the wind and the sun isn't there all the time. It's just a matter of fact. Well, it's there all the time, but it's not maybe there where you need it all the time. There's a need for an intermediate storage system, one way or the other. A battery, it could be water, it could be an energy storage system. Batteries are obvious ones because they can also guarantee, mobility, electromobility, and all kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, Germany is a net exporting country. And I have 2 passports, and I would like to make money on both. It's something that goes beyond just solving a small problem. It is key to the economy. It's key to actually making the acceleration that you talk about a success. And I've just realized there's a big science program going on. There's the BMBF is funding a big battery center, right? It's funding a huge center close to Münster right now, and I believe it's a Fraunhofer Institute, if I get this correct, and it's under construction right now, and hopefully, they build it as fast as Elon Musk built the Tesla factory here in Brandenburg, right? But those things do exist, they do scale, they do integrate the things that we discussed about here.
Professor Martin Winter, who's heading that center, is also part of the Big Map project. And I could say a lot of German industry is also part of this, and the cutting-edge materials producers. We also have cell producers involved, because it's key. We need all the players across the entire discovery chain to work together to solve this, and solve it fast.
I want to ask you, okay, we have great ideas. How do we get them to you, and then how do you scale them up? Please solve the energy transition today.
Yeah, but we talked about people before, and of course, that's the key. We need to train more people in these new technologies, and we need to empower them to also take the technologies to market. And what is developed in research, for it to really make a difference, it needs to be commercialized. So my take on this is really that we as a company can help the bigger players to create these better batteries. But there's so much to say about how to get these technologies out from research to commercialization. And I think our story is a little bit like that, because we're a university spin-out from Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. And all the IP that was developed in research is owned by the company. It was very easy, actually, to get it like that. It's a teacher's exception that we have. But of course, we were in the valley of death in the beginning. We couldn't get any funding, no VC money or anything like that. But we actually got a few governmental grants to continue to develop the technology, and until we were ready to take on investments. So there's a lot to do also on the policy level to enable it.
We have just over 5 minutes before we open up to the audience for questions. And so I always like to take a minute and imagine, okay, if we had our druthers, if we got what we wanted, what would be for each of you the technological breakthrough that's going to be the new coal, or that's going to be new petroleum of the 21st century or of the 22nd century? What do we need? What, in your opinion, what do we need? What is going to put us over the edge in achieving carbon neutrality?
That was a big ask.
I know.
But I think so. A lot of it boils down to a combination of efficiency and activity for many of the materials, at the same time durability and viability. Right? We need to have products that are efficient, but that also last long enough. And I think integrating both of those aspects in the design process, whether we do it for power to X, whether we do it for batteries, I see as the big thing. Shortening that gap so we don't have to wait 10 years before we have tested a battery that's good enough to give you a 10-year warranty in your car. We need to shorten that. And whether we do it for power to X, or whether we do it for batteries, it doesn't matter to me, but we need the key technologies and we need them fast.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think it's just a very simple insight that we have the COP meeting just in parallel now, that we really know across the globe that we are sitting on the same boat, so that our globe is the same boat and that we have to manage this transition of the energy system. And so that's not one single step, but there are a lot of things which can be done. We can start now and continue on a global scale, but we need to be, this awareness is from key importance. I think the people will change the world, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I fully agree. If I have the magic crystal, I would say the key is going to adopt and utilize, implement the basic science in nanoscience, nanotechnology we have learned over the last few decades, put them under the condition, under the boundary condition for future material. And I really think we live in a very exciting time, and the whole industry can be completely transformed. The key is to utilize the knowledge we gained at the system level. And that is going to be a grand challenge, from the synthesis all the way to integration.
Mm-hmm. Please, Johannes.
Yeah, I fully agree with the points that have been said so far. I think my perspective is from industry, and there you also need to think about how to manufacture it in a cost-effective way. And that's one of the struggles that we have sometimes if we simulate a really good formulation, but it's too expensive to manufacture. So that perspective, I think, is also important to really solve it. Someone needs to manufacture it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 3 points. The first one is pretty easy, it's openness to new technologies, which is in our society not so obvious. Right. Usually new technologies are faced with criticism, and the first question is, what can go wrong instead of what can it achieve? So I think that's a mindset. The second thing is better planning. What I mean by that is, on big science project I have learned it's like playing chess. You have to play 3-4 steps in advance. So I'm convinced that we're going to solve that material problem, probably better than we even can think about today. But if we would have solved it, and if we had all the windmills and the solar panels and God knows what else, there would be no way to transport the energy. And then, if there would be a way to transport it, there would be no way to store it. And so on, right? So the planning stage today should be the thinking through of what we really need in terms of infrastructure if all these things work out. Because I'm convinced they will work out because of all these smart people and smart ideas. And the last thing is just, it needs a lot of money. I think somebody said that earlier today in a different meeting, people, money, and space. All right? So I mentioned that earlier. I said, nothing motivates people as much as greed. And that's true. We come from the Silicon Valley, we know the venture capitalists, we have seen these big firms, how much money they can move around and pump in, and it's okay to make money, and people have to understand it's okay. So create an environment in which venture capitalists are willing to take risks, and then also take home big payments. That's an okay environment, and it will drive this transition to market much faster.
I might disagree with you slightly on that, but I will say, I was speaking to someone from industry just a couple of days ago, they're going to be carbon neutral by 2025, and they'll no longer use fossil fuels by 2033, which I think is ambitious. And I said, that's not what the EU is asking, why are you doing that? And he said, because we want to be around. in the sense of we want to survive as people, as individuals on this planet, but also we want our business to be around. We want to make sure that our business is a success, and if we don't do it, now we won't be around. But I think you had something else that you wanted to say.
It was just, I've been fortunate enough to be a visiting professor at SLAC, so I know the VC environment there, and I have a startup in the Nordic countries. And there's definitely a different risk aversion on the European side, in particular, maybe in the Northern European side. I think there's a drive right now towards a more ambitious, you can say, not just investing in bits, but actually also investing in atoms, that there's more risk-willing capital there, and I think that's key. I think because in housing some of the materials development processes there, you're talking about millions. And if we have to get that in soft funding, it takes forever, right? So
her question was, how can we accelerate it, right?
Yeah.
The policymakers can accelerate it. They can provide a basis for planning, for acceleration, and incentivizing.
That was my question, but before we get to that question, I want to get to our audience questions. Adam?
So we're very lucky to have some questions from the audience online, and I'd also welcome anyone in our physical audience here to put up their hands if they have a question. I can see there's one question over here in the front row of this block. And please stand and introduce yourself.
Sure, hi. My name is Will Savage. I currently work for a science journal for kids. There was a point you made, Johannes, you touched on briefly about policy, and actually was mentioned briefly at the end there too. I'm curious to know in the short and medium term, aside from the obvious things like the Ukraine war, what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges from the policy side with regards to all the progress, et cetera, and tainted progress that you mentioned today?
So the question is about the biggest challenge from the policy side. Who wants to take, please?
The first thing that comes to mind, I would say, is supply chains and making sure that they're resilient and from countries that we can trust and want to collaborate with.
Yeah. Please, Bernd Reich.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is that we have regulations, policy around, which gives a clear boundaries for the investments. I think this is important. If you talk to the companies, they need to know what are the boundaries, where can I do the investment, how do I get the money back to get the private capital in. And it's important that policy takes the people into account, that this is really also, because these are long-term investments, so they cannot change every 4 years if a government changes or faster. So this is, I think this is the biggest challenge for policy, to make the combination as regulations which are the right ones for economy, but also which are accepted by the people. So.
Thank you so much for that question. Science journalism for kids is fantastic. Adam, do we have another question?
Sure. There's an increasing clarity that we need more than carbon neutrality, that we actually need negative emissions if we're going to limit global warming, especially to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. At the same time, compared to a lot of the technologies we've been talking about, negative emissions technologies are still in their infancy. What can we do to accelerate these technologies?
Please.
I fully agree, and I think this is what we need to work on, how to accelerate it. I hope that the transition to a carbon neutrality will also give a lot of, let's say, pressure to science to do this, because if we use, for example, if we go for synthetic fuels and so on, at the beginning we can use point sources, but on the longer term there are no point sources available, so we need to get out the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and we should start this as soon as possible to develop the technologies.
I would come back to the planning, right? The lack of planning will lead to failure, right? This will all succeed, but ultimately it won't have an impact because everything behind it isn't there yet. You know, we start pulling high voltage cables and for energy transport through Germany, you know, when we already have the solar fields and the wind and the wind power. That's too late. They should be there today. And plan for success. Plan for the fact that this will all work today.
There's a really fabulous saying that I learned as a kid. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Correct.
Which I think is, I don't know if that translates into German, but.
I see there's a question way back here, so if you could get a microphone, please stand and introduce yourself.
Hi, Bengs Wersbeck from Technical University Berlin and Berliner Immobilienmanagement. So you were talking more about also the factor human, and now actually I was also researching about how to make the buildings climate neutral, but the public buildings. So maybe in households it's more easier to maybe decrease the energy usage because they got the bills, or maybe to accelerate also the transition to more clean energy. But how to break the wall actually in public buildings? So how to maybe more engage also the citizens and for the energy acceleration. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that question. If one of you wants to answer it.
I mean, there are initiatives being taken also for the new regulatory initiatives taken to secure that there's a better utilization of the energy in buildings, new buildings, whether or not you need solar panels on the roofs and so forth. It depends a lot sort of geopolitically where you are in the world, how severely they are implemented, but at least in the EU, some initiatives on the way.
Maybe I can add a bit, because the question is from Berlin and I'm living in Berlin. And this discussion is, I think, from key importance. But there are now new policies coming in, regulations that you should put solar on the roofs and so on. But I think it's the way of planning. So there are many schools are new built in Berlin, for example. And they are built, and later on they said that we would put solar cells on the roof and stepwise. But it's partly that at the moment then the investment is done, but it's not calculated from the beginning what are the running costs. So it would be much cheaper to do everything from the beginning, for example, for new buildings. On the other hand, if you think about in Berlin, I think 80% of the people rent their apartment. So if you need to change it, you have to discuss, and I think she's from the Berliner Immobilien. I think the question was from this part. I think it's also a question of regulation and a question of political will. So it should be not that complicated. It should be the standard to have net zero emission buildings. So the EU regulations are going in this direction, but it takes 50 years to rebuild all those buildings.
It does. It was just, I don't know if any of you, we're in this Berlin bubble sometimes, but there's the Tagesspiegel just had a bit this morning in their checkpoint talking about how we live in housing that is owned by the city, and we're not allowed, we have a great balcony, but we're not allowed to put solar panels on our balcony. Only people who own their homes are. And I think, okay, solar panels are not new technology, but I think that also policy needs to be have openness to new technology, even that new technology is decades old.
We have a small amount of time and a big question to end on from Matthew Meyer from the Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. Matthew points out that new technologies are, of course, important, but asks whether researchers and scientists should also be emphasizing the need to shift where our energy is going and potentially shift the economic system which decides such questions.
We all need a minute to think about that. Can you repeat that question for us?
Sure.
That is a big question to end things.
So the essence is that Matthew believes we need to rethink our prioritizations of what we use our resources for, which in turn would mean rethinking our economic system to focus on sustainability and human well-being. And the question I suppose Matthew is asking is that a role for researchers as well, to advocate for this as well as advocating for technology?
Thank you so much, Adam.
Well,
Yes.
You go ahead.
I just say that I feel that already in the many researchers that I'm involved in, that the focus has shifted towards the technologies and the materials that will have the bigger societal impact. So I think researchers are already taking steps in that direction in the topics of investigation, the kind of materials we're looking at. We're not looking at exotic materials that can only go on space flights. We're looking at scalable technologies that can be implemented to the benefit of society. So I think we're taking steps in that direction.
I can share some of my personal experience. given the project we've been dealing with, and we really see the need to get the different discipline involved. Work with people from public health, work on with ecology, life cycle analysis, even doing consumer interviews. For some of the stuff we do, actually, we interview about 200 stakeholders. And that really, in the traditional way, we say, oh, that's not what a scientist engineer is supposed to do. But the outcome is that by doing those interviews and talking to different stakeholders, make our research much fuller than what it was before. So you have the knowledge, you can do absolutely free, curiosity-driven, and right now I would say there are good environment for that, which is wonderful, and that acts as the fountain of knowledge to support what has come out later. But as time goes by, at least in my own discipline, I see a shift that we are more inclined, students are much more inclined to meet with collaborators and to learn things that are outside their own discipline. And I think it's definitely a good trend to go, and it should be enforced, promoted, or whatever the word you wanted to put in there.
Absolutely, and speaking of time that goes by, our time is now up. Thank you so much for joining me today. Audience, let's give a warm of thanks. Kenj Vega.